A top American sprinter is banned after testing positive following marijuana use. Sha'Carri Richardson has been apologising on NBC.
It will never be a steroid attached to the name Sha'Carri Richardson. The charge and what the situation was marijuana. I'm not encouraging anybody to do it. I'm not saying, don't do it or anything like that. But if you choose to do things in your personal time or things like that, you just should know, all right, beware of the consequences.
She's accepted a 1-month ban ahead of the Tokyo Games and still could get to race in an Olympic relay. But should marijuana use lead to such a suspension at all? We'll delve into that on Sport or Not and give you the latest on the fraught buildup to the Olympics and take you inside the ongoing Euro 2020 issues. Plus, how UEFA's overhauled its financial fair play oversight, the influence of Jorge Mendes in football, and World Cricket's moving an event, all while its CEO is suspended. Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Sport Unlocked, the podcast digesting the best of the week's sports news, analysing all the top stories as we delve behind particularly the big competitions at the moment. We've got the Euros and the Copa America ongoing, and we're just weeks away from the start of the Olympics. Alongside me, Rob Harris from the Associated Press, as ever, Martyn Ziegler from the Times and Tariq Panja from the New York Times. Welcome back along.
Yeah, nice to be with you guys. It's I think the Euros, for all the fact it's a strange time, with this pandemic going on and playing in 11 different countries, thousands of miles. Some teams are having to travel. It's been brilliant. I think difficult for some of those national teams involved, but all the same, I think it's after a year in which sport has been so affected by what's been happening in the world. It's been a real breath of fresh air. Football's been excellent. Obviously, it's different to normal, but I think it's building up to a really strong climax.
And both myself and Tariq have been at Wembley over the last week, where the crowds have gradually been increasing as well.
Yeah, that was nice to see crowds at meaningful games again. It feels like we're heading to the new season with a bit of optimism with this fantastic tournament, like Martyn said. I mean, all these goals as well, so many goals. It seems like attacking football is ruling the roost, and the viewing figures around Europe have been magnificent, haven't they?
Yeah, obviously, particularly in Britain, over 20 million watching England's victory over Germany, and that was the game with more than 40,000 at, and did feel like it was full at Wembley. It was the biggest crowd in the UK at any event legally for, 15 months or so.
It'd be interesting to see what when UEFA look at how the tournament went in terms of like ticket sales and stuff. I do think there are some venues around Europe which haven't sold out, even with the reduced capacities. I think ticket prices is going to be something which they may look at, because it's always a difficult one, isn't it? If you compare it to a sort of top pop concert or something like that, then maybe you think it's acceptable. But when you look, you can go on the website. You could buy tickets for the final in London. They're still available on the website, but you have to spend €950. It's a lot of money for one match.
One of the concerns, obviously, about these Euros taking place during the pandemic is the potential risk of coronavirus infection spreading. We've had concerns raised in St. Petersburg over a spike in cases there. And we did hear from Public Health Scotland that almost 2,000 coronavirus cases have been linked to Euros games. Distill these figures down, though, and they're not quite what they seem. The fact is, yes, 1,294 people were infected, having gone to London for Scotland's game against England, but only 397 of them were actually at Wembley. A lot of these other cases potentially were people watching at homes, in fan zones, or in pubs even. And the crucial thing is that Public Health Scotland couldn't provide is how many of these people have been infected, having been vaccinated, and did anyone require hospitalisation? But it did get quite a lot of headlines about threat of the Euro spreading coronavirus.
Yeah, it's hard to actually tell the impact. I suppose time will tell properly when we see the numbers, like you say, in the right context. But the voices of criticism have been interesting as well. the German foreign minister called it, completely irresponsible to have the finals in London with that many supporters. And I think the WHO has been critical as well. It's hard to balance it out. Like we've talked about this magnificent tournament, fans coming back, etc. And then you kind of play that alongside some of the stuff we're talking about. Time will tell. UEFA really wanted fans there. They've got them there. They've had a really good tournament. Let's hope the kind of after parties not some sort of bleak, horror show with viruses spread all over Europe when these 2,500 VIPs head back to wherever they're coming from.
Yeah, German Chancellor Angela Merkel telling Boris Johnson after meetings with the British PM on Friday that she was very much concerned whether it was a bit too much, the 40,000 crowd that saw England play Germany. Of course, she's probably not too best pleased the fact Germany lost.
Well, it didn't prevent her travelling to the United Kingdom, did it? So that does seem a bit strange. I mean, I was actually looking at the hospitalisation rates in the UK. They are tiny compared to back in December and January, for example. So, and that's probably as a result of the vaccination campaign. So I think it's more of an issue for those countries which haven't had that vaccination campaign program to such an extent. Health, though, has been an issue, not in other ways in this Euros, and we're talking about player overload. If you look at the FIFA Pro, if you look at their website, they actually have a digital tool where you can see how many matches the top players have played, and some of those have been involved in the Euros. They basically have not stopped playing since June 2020. I think the player who's played the most matches is Bruno Fernandes, Manchester United and Portugal. He's played 72 games. And Ruben Diaz, Manchester City and Portugal, he's played more minutes than any other player. So we have seen quite a few matches in the Euros where players have pulled up with injuries. I know it happens at every international tournament. It's just be interesting to see, and I think they are going to monitor this, if this is a particular effect of these championships after 13 months of almost continuous play, whether players are basically being asked to do too much.
You mentioned the data there on number of minutes played and games played, but the other thing is rest. There's some interesting stats again from that FIFA Pro list. The players like Romelu Lukaku had like a pre-season of 8 days, or holidays of 8 days. He had a week off between last season and this season, which is still, well, his season just finished with Belgium being knocked out of the Euros as we record this podcast. Ruben Diaz, you mentioned, had 9 days off, and like these guys have had no holiday as well, and that goes for those guys in playing at the Copa America as well. They've hardly had off-season breaks as well, and they've gone from Europe to South America to play games. It kind of feels, again, we'll find out, when the scientists or whoever the experts are do the real analysis. But, we've just watched this Belgium-Italy game. A player of the tournament for me, Spinazzola of Italy, the left wing back. He was in tears. He appears to have a soft tissue injury of some kind. Eden Hazard didn't play for Belgium today after injuring a muscle. And we had in the other quarter-final on Friday one of Switzerland's top players, Mbola. He seemed to have left the field with a hamstring as well. Yes, these happen at a lot of tournaments, but these guys are arriving at this event, one of the big blue ribbon tournaments in their careers, absolutely exhausted. They're cream crackered.
Yeah, I meant one of our pod listeners, Gab Marcotti, pointing out on Twitter that Spinazzola has had to deal with many injuries in his career. Obviously, what the medics will now be looking at is how much this latest one linked to the massive workload over the last year during this congested season.
Yeah, and the other issue is that this tournament's going to finish on July the 11th. A lot of clubs will be expecting players to return for pre-season training on July the 11th, or if not before. Obviously, they will give the players involved in the latter stages a bit of a break, but it's not going to be that much time until they're back in action again for their clubs.
And even more pressing for some of them is actually Spain are going to take 6 players that are at the Euros to the Tokyo Olympics, which is pretty incredible. I mean, it's not in the FIFA international calendar for mandatory release of players, but apparently in Spain there is a regulation that forces Spanish clubs to release their players. But in France, they've actually had to name 11 new players to their Olympic football squad because many coaches did block the initial selections.
Yeah, well, it was France. France are lucky because they just got this sort of squads and squads and squads of this great talent. But you're right. You know, it's ridiculous that these Spanish players who've just had this season are gonna have to go to the Olympics. And you can't ask the players. They're probably going to say, "Yeah, we want to because you're going to win a gold medal." But it shouldn't be down to them to decide. There should be some kind of cap or some way of limiting the minutes. The other thing is, let's not forget, this is going to be they're going into a season with the Qatar World Cup that's moved into November and December. So it's this crazy packed schedule from last year because of the pandemic meets another crazy schedule because of the World Cup. It's just relentless. Something's got to give somewhere.
And in the summer of 2022, clubs are going to want to try go back on pre-season tours again to make up some of the lost revenue during the pandemic.
Undoubtedly. I mean, also Copa America is going on at the moment, and I imagine there will be players involved in some of those teams who will also get the call up to the Olympics. But that quite often happens.
Of course, there's always questions about whether or not even football should be at the Olympics. It's hardly the pinnacle of the sport, yet it's an extra tournament squeezed into the international football year. And the reason it's there, of course, is because it normally sells a lot of tickets held in big stadiums across the host country. But we're counting down to an Olympics where we don't even now know if any fans will be allowed in any of the venues as we prepare for the start of the games on the 23rd of July in Tokyo. And it's been a load of fast-moving developments again this week on the preparations.
Yeah, the Prime Minister has said that the rising coronavirus infection rate in Tokyo is causing concerns. He's fully prepared for there to be no spectators. I think it was only last week that they said that they were looking at having 10,000 allowed into each venue. And there's some fairly sort of dramatic restrictions been announced and some sort of rather controversial warnings and threats, particularly against journalists for if they dare to breach the sort of quarantine restrictions. The Tokyo organisers have said things like the Japanese public will be watching you and they will name and shame you on social media. Security guards will.
You're seen like walking on the wrong side of the road, and you're going to get all these fingers pointed at you and say, "Hey, what the hell are you doing in our country?" It is kind of weirdly, I don't know, terrifying, really. Like, how do you do your job? How do you follow the rules? There are so many rules. We mentioned last week this tracking app, and I noticed a lot of people are saying that they've been trying to get answers for all this uncertainty, and the organising committee has failed to reply to them. I've had messages from colleagues elsewhere asking me, what you're doing. Have you got a number for X, Y, and Z? Because, as you say, the Olympics are upon us, and there is a lot of confusion still.
And obviously, these are games being held in the pandemic. There's a lot of concerns in Japan. We as journalists have got used to restrictions at all the events we go to. In football stadiums, we've always been allowed in. In England, through the pandemic, the numbers have been limited. We can't go face-to-face with the players. But we are experiencing a different level of restriction, aren't we, in terms of movements in Tokyo for media who are able to go into the country?
2 weeks of quarantine to start with as well. That's going to be really interesting. So, most of us aren't going to arrive until fairly close to the games, those of us who are going. So the 2 weeks of quarantine will probably mean at least half of your Olympics would be limited to your hotel and a pre-authorized list of places you can go to.
Yeah, I mean, it does pose challenges for much reporting. I mean, I think the bigger concern is actually preventing any of these restrictions being maintained in years to come at other events where restrictions are in place. And a lot of the public do look at us as media and say, well, why do you need to go to these events? We can't travel yet. Obviously, our hope is to be able to impartial report when there is actually something of note. That helps to hold people to account still as well, because ultimately it's an Olympics. They're controlling big finances and running a major event where it shouldn't happen in the shadow, should it?
It absolutely shouldn't. I mean, if you look at some of what the official Tokyo rules are stating, it says if you are identified walking outside, the security guards will ask you to stay in your room and you must follow their instructions. If you do not, you'll be reported to Tokyo 2020. And then you could have strict measures, including possible withdrawal of accreditation. I mean, it's sort of felt really heavy-handed, and not surprisingly, it's provoked quite a few protests.
Let's see if things loosen up as we get nearer to it. And I feel, to be fair, Rob and I work for pretty strong, established news organisations. I think for freelancers, it's just a lot worse. There's been a few people talking about it. Some of the people we know, I don't want to, obviously it's up to them to talk publicly, but for freelancers in particular, and those at smaller organisations, it's I think going to be a lot more difficult, and it just feels a little bit uneven, a little bit unfair, and it's no small cost as well to say that you're going to go and cover an Olympics as a freelancer all the way to Tokyo. You could say, well, why do you need to go? But this is their bread and butter. This is this people's livelihoods, and they cover these events. It's going to be extremely challenging. There was some other IOC news as well this week, guys.
Yeah, so the controversial issue about political demonstrations at the Olympics is something which has actually it's been going on for as long as I've covered the Olympics, which is sort of the last 20 years. So they have actually relaxed it somewhat, the IOC. They've always been absolutely adamant nothing can be allowed. But what they've now said is that you are allowed to make a demonstration or a protest within certain parameters before the start of your event. But this still bans anything. You're not allowed to take the knee on the podium. The famous Black Power salute that Tommy Smith and John Carlos did in Mexico 68 on their podium, that's still banned. So it's trying to sort of answer the demands from some of the athletes involved, but it's very much a halfway house, which is part of the course as far as the IOC is concerned.
So an athlete can take a knee at the start of competition, say on the start line, but not if they win on the podium after collecting gold.
Yeah, as far as the IOC are concerned, the podium is the holiest of holies, sacrosanct. It's quite hard. They're trying to thread the needle, aren't they, here? There is a lot of backlash they would have faced if they had come down hard, given the current environment, social justice campaigns across the globe from athletes across sports. Marcus Rashford in the UK, tennis players, athletes across the world. Be interesting what type of protests we see and whether they're going to all be allowed. There's so many different issues at stake, and that will be one for the IOC to opine on. I'm sure they will. It'll give us something to write about as well.
Yeah, interesting. If you look at the wording, it makes it clear that any sort of thing, for example, when at the Beijing Winter Olympics next year, that sort of anti-host protests, for example, people protesting about the treatment of the Uyghurs or human rights in Hong Kong, that will not be permitted.
Well, of course, a lot of this did start to be reassessed after the protest by athletes, the action after the murder of George Floyd in the US in 2020. And what we saw then really is probably started in the Bundesliga, didn't it? Where players took matters into their own hand. They chose to wear the Justice for George Floyd t-shirts. There was attempts to impose sanctions on them. And eventually you got FIFA saying that common sense should apply. Are we just going to see at this Olympics that athletes do what they want to do, and if they deem a cause worth campaigning for in the middle of a competition on the podium, they will? And if the IOC did try to punish them, there'd be a huge backlash against the Olympic movement.
Exactly. We saw it this Euros, actually, what kind of backlash you get if you kind of get it wrong with UEFA and what happened with Pride in Munich. It's very similar. They banned the rainbow colours at the Munich stadium. We talked about this, I think, last week. And whether right, wrong, whatever you may think of it, the public scorn, the criticism came in from all quarters, and I think not only do these organizations feel it, but the sponsors that pay millions of euros and dollars and yen into their bank accounts also start to feel it, and that's kind of changed the debate as well. And not long after we go to Beijing, after Tokyo, we have the Qatar World Cup. We've already had protests and T-shirts voicing solidarity for migrant workers in Qatar, for example. Could we see that in Qatar, for example, at the World Cup there?
I actually think, in terms of making a protest, it's actually quite a good thing that it's still banned by the ISE, because then it makes the protest all that much more hard hitting. I mean, the fact, I can mention Tommy Smith and John Carlos, trips off my tongue 53 years after they made their protest when I was 1 year old, is a it just shows what an incredible, powerful action that was. And if that can be replicated in any way in any other Olympics, for a similar cause, then fantastic. And if it's given extra prominence by the fact it's against the ICU rules, then so much the better.
Well, one athlete we don't know whether or not should be going to Tokyo yet is the American sprinter Sha'Carri Richardson. She was a great medal hope for them, but she's been caught taking marijuana, and she did accept a 30-day suspension that ends on July the 27th. So she would still be in time to run the relays. But the question is the punishment too lenient, or actually should a sprinter not be banned at all for having taken any marijuana?
Yeah, I think it's a real shame. She's 21 years old, a real gold medal contender. And it was a recreational drug, a mistake. She wasn't trying to boost her performance as well. And in her mitigation, if there is any, she said it was after her finding out her birth mother had died. Quite sad what happened to her. But I guess these rules are the rules, and you could say it's lenient or not lenient, but it, like I said, it wasn't performance enhancing, and that's what's on the paper. It's heartbreaking in many ways for her, and a shame for the Olympics that you lose one of the biggest stars from one of the biggest races, the women's 100 meters. But Martyn, what do you think? The rules are there, I guess.
Well, I actually think the rules are wrong. The WADA rules do state that marijuana is prohibited, but it doesn't say it's performance enhancing. I just can't see any justifiable argument for imposing bans on athletes. I mean, if anything, it's the opposite of performance enhancing. It really is. You can perhaps make an argument for, like, I don't know, something like a snooker player or something like that may sort of. I mean, even that I think is probably unlikely. But it's just one of those things. It seems like a sort of historic thing that was added in when people thought all recreational drugs should be part of the WADA list. I think it's an anachronism, and I think it's wrong, and I think it's a great shame that she's going to have to miss the Olympics because of it.
Her sponsors have backed her as well. I saw Nike put a statement out saying they appreciated her kind of candor, her honesty, and accountability, and continue to support her through that time. But it kind of speaks to your point. It's not as if she was trying to cheat anyone. This is something that she did. Might regret it. It was in the moment. She did that, and just a shame, really, isn't it?
Yeah, very different, obviously, to, say, Christian Coleman's ban, another US sprinter who is suspended for missing tests. And then we covered on previous episode about Shelby Houlihan, who was banned for what she blamed was tainted meat in a burrito.
Another athlete who, like Coleman, will miss the Olympics for failing to appear at the appointed time for random drug testing is the Nigerian-born Bahraini athlete Saliwa Eid Nasser, who was one of the favourites for the 400 metres. She's going to miss it. You've got to wonder, these athletes, especially these ones who are gold medal contenders, like Coleman, like Nasser in this case. It's kind of important to be where you're supposed to be. I know people might think it's like a big ask, but it's an hour of the day. You're going to be appearing at this event, which is the most important event in your career, the thing that pays your bills, the thing that makes you wealthy, the thing that you're going to be known for. Just be there. To miss 3 in a calendar year is kind of spectacularly thick as well, I'd say. Once you've done 2, surely you're going to be around for that 3rd one. And this is 2 big champions.
I think that's a much bigger issue than somebody who smokes some marijuana and falls foul of the US anti-doping rule book, which says athletes who smoke marijuana potentially open themselves up to greater risk because they have slower reactions and make poor decisions, which is the argument the US anti-doping use.
100% agree with you there, Martyn. But that's why Coleman and Nasser's are multi-year bans, not a month. Unfortunately for the sprinter there, it's a month, but it's a month just before the Olympics. It's just a real shame. If this was, I don't know, another time of the year, you take it on the chin, right? It's just this is like the biggest, most costliest joint she may have ever smoked.
There seems to be a growing list of people who don't actually want to go to the Olympics, particularly in tennis. We've had Rafa Nadal, Serena Williams, Simona Halep, and Dominic Thiem. So a lot of people really not ranking the games as important based on our priorities for the year, given all the restrictions that will be in place there. It won't be a particularly enjoyable experience for them either.
No, and also it'll be interesting to see if some of those at Wimbledon are going to make it. For example, Serena Williams was forced to pull out after slipping on court at Wimbledon. Not the only person. It's been interesting to try and get this tournament underway with this roof adding to injuries at the tournament. And for a lot of these players, given the pandemic, etc., it's been such a up and down year for the sport. And then coming back, getting hurt again. We talked about this at the start of the podcast. All the various injuries. It's not the easiest time to be a professional athlete, is it?
No, and I think those people who have to make those decisions and thinking about their paychecks, obviously you don't get any pay for going to the Olympics. If you're a professional tennis player or a professional golfer, you're effectively going there for the sport, for your country, and not for cash in the bank.
Well, some might say some of the most lucrative jobs in sport are actually on various committees and away from the Olympics. And back to UEFA, we've had some news of appointments to the Financial Fair Play committees.
Yeah, we've had some interesting appointments to the club financial control bodies, the CFCB. Pretty much wholesale changes from the panels that adjudicated the controversial cases we've had in recent years, notably Manchester City, I suppose, the most notable one that ended up with CAS overturning the 2-year ban. The most interesting appointment for me was the former US soccer president, Sunil Gulati, first non-European to be put in charge of the investigatory committee. He's going to be losing his football role at FIFA soon. He's on the FIFA council, maybe wanting a home. He's very good friends with the UEFA president, Alexander Seferin. And, which is great for Sunil Gulati, economics professor at Columbia, probably has a CV. But I guess, I don't know, when one's considering how independent these bodies are, you probably want arm's length relationships from the UEFA administration, from the president, etc. And this might be one that some people, I've had messages from people, for example, saying perhaps this one's one that is a little bit too close. There's also a Slovenian lawyer who is, I think, the vice person on that particular body, the investigatory chamber. And she's also linked to the UEFA president. Her and her husband are linked to current UEFA presidents from a law firm in Slovenia. And again, you think, perhaps got the qualifications, etc., but are you too close to the administration? What do you think?
Well, it's very strange that somebody is based in New York is going to be dealing with these cases in Europe. But I mean, I presume you'll have to spend a lot of time actually flying across the Atlantic if that's the case. You can't do everything remotely on that front, can you? Or maybe you can. But it's an interesting one. Sunil Gulati's been around international football a long time, hasn't he? We've known him for the best part of 2 decades, both first at US Soccer, then at CONCACAF, then at FIFA Council itself. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that.
And he certainly knows his European football. He made the trip during the pandemic from the US to Portugal to watch the Chelsea-Man City Champions League final in Porto the other week.
He did. Perhaps that's where this thing was sealed. But guys, let me ask you again though on independence. How important is independence on these committees, be it disciplinary or investigative? Is it important, or if you're someone's pal, does it matter?
Well, you've got to balance independence and knowledge. And how many times we've seen people appointed to these committees ruling on governance or finances that perhaps are less familiar with the issues, seem perhaps too distant. Then on the flip side is the danger that actually someone appears too close and it doesn't create the distance that you need for some of these very, very contentious investigations. In this case, when you're investigating whether or not clubs have breached financial fair play, which, as we've seen, can lead to clubs being banned from European competitions.
I'd argue it's a good thing, though, isn't it, to not know anything and you just look at the piece of paper and the details?
Yeah, we've had the former Belgian Prime Minister Yves Le Terme as the head of the investigatory on before. In fact, he was actually named by Manchester City in their appeal against the UEFA's proceedings over financial fair play as being somebody they absolutely criticised for his conduct. So he was independent as far as we can tell, but that didn't stop him from encountering a serious attack from the club involved.
The other thing I noticed is the CVs of these guys are there are a few more unknown characters than in the previous ones. The other, again, on paper, there's not all of them. I mean, Sunil carries a great deal of heft there, I suppose. You've described what he's done. But there's just random lawyers from Liechtenstein in Italy that no one's really heard of. The previous group included people from the European Union. There's a lot of people have gone. There's Mr. Timmermans from the EU's disappeared. Damien Nevin from the European Union, lawyer from European Union, has disappeared. The judge, Cunha from European Court of Justice, he's gone. The new guy is the head of the adjudicatory chamber, appears to be a lecturer at the Sorbonne, which is, a lovely place to work, etc. But I don't know if they have the same degree of heft. A lot of the people who left expressed their frustration when they did leave at the process. You saw a lot of their cases reversed in the end. And I don't know, we've already talked about this in previous episodes, how, UEFA is looking to reform financial fair play. The old system is going. Seferin's talked about luxury taxes. I don't know, maybe it's going to be more of a collegiate situation, more deals made, and we're going to not see this idea of, or the threat of clubs being banned in the future, and whatever we had in the past might be, rightly or wrongly, you can argue either way, watered down a little bit, and some new rules being brought in, and maybe it doesn't matter who are on these panels looking at the future.
Well, we still do await details on exactly how financial fair play will be reformed, and the world of sports governance always does keep us busy. Away from football too, in cricket, there have been some new developments following the suspension of the ICC chief executive, Manu Soni.
Yeah, so this is something which there's been a bit of a toxic atmosphere in the ICC over the last year. The new chairman's come in. There's been sort of the various countries involved that have been jostling for power. And one thing that's happened, which we knew in March, was that Manu Soni was suspended following a review by Pricewaterhouse into the whole sort of structure and administration of the organisation. What's now emerged is he has hit back at the ICC in a sort of detailed document which is various media organisations have received, alleging he's the victim of a premeditated witch hunt. He's absolutely denied the allegations that he bullied staff or that he was aggressive. And he says this is the ICC chairman, Greg Barclay, is effectively the sort of judge, jury, and executioner in the process, and that it's a blatant attempt to force him from office. So a very difficult time for international cricket's ruling organisation.
And there have been some hearings, yet it's unclear, I think, what the next stage in this process is.
Well, he in March he took 3 months off leave with what he said was a stress-related illness. He's due to come back at any time, and then we will see the disciplinary hearing will take place, and from that we will see if he is forced to resign or if he is sacked or any other disciplinary action is taken. It's watch this space.
Ziggs, and I kind of say this every week now, but again, these organisations, they're kind of a law unto themselves. There's no independent oversight of any of these places. So this is the governing body of cricket, based in Dubai, I think. No one else is looking at what they're doing. It's all going to be done in-house. Again, it just seems like sport can't be trusted to look after itself. There's going to be, surely, as usual, some sort of compromise done, and we're going to move on. I say in Asia in particular is kind of a bit of a black hole. I remember we talked about this weeks and weeks and weeks ago. There was a case of the Asian Football Confederation that CAS had ruled that Sheikh Ahmed of Kuwait had tried to manipulate the elections there. They've kind of proved that point. They said a female official who tried to stand for the FIFA Council, she was wrongly denied a chance at a fair fight. And that CAS ruling, which came months ago, has kind of been met with silence, continuing silence. You get a pithy statement. We saw one from FINA last week after the Sun Yang swimming hearing, which we talked about, saying, we're going to study the ruling and we will come back to you in due course. But they never actually do come back, and the whole jamboree rolls on. There's malfeasance, bad governance, accusations, etc. And this is across the board, it seems.
I think certainly in those political issues, and there is absolutely a black hole when it comes to governance. I suppose you can argue from an ICC administration point of view that if somebody is guilty of some sort of staff issue, such as bullying behaviour, if it was any of our organisations, then the chairman, the executive chairman would say have a disciplinary process, and the person involved would be sacked. So you could argue if the ICC are just doing that, it's an internal matter, it's an internal staff member, it's not a political appointment, and then therefore they can take that sort of action.
And in the meantime, they've actually had some big decisions to be making, because this week they've decided to move the ICC Men's 2020 World Cup that was due to be staged in India, and have moved it to the UAE and Oman. That's taking place across October and November. So it's a reminder, actually, that even as we look later in the year, that events are still expected to be disrupted by the pandemic. And so all this happening at a pretty critical time for the ICC.
It is indeed. It's not just cricket. The Rugby League World Cup is due to take place in England in the autumn. But there's uncertainty over whether New Zealand and Australia will come now, because they're reluctant to put themselves into a difficult position. And one thing for certain, if they don't come, then there is no World Cup. It'll have to be postponed.
Yeah, one of the other things, Rob, that's been hit by the pandemic, was never going to be stopped, I suppose, is the football transfer market. We've got the Euros that's already started, but people are moving, players are moving, and coaches are moving. Spurs, for example, have finally got a new coach, Nuno Santo de Spirito, former Wolves manager, client of a certain Jorge Mendes, super agent extraordinaire. He's already placed one of his clients at Wolverhampton to replace Nuno, and in fact had lined up another of his clients, Rino Gattuso, to go to Tottenham after he left Fiorentina after just 23 days. He hadn't even started. His first day of the job was supposed to be July the 1st. And funny enough, the reason for his departure from Fiorentina was, according to people at that Italian club, Jorge Mendes. Gattuso, they allege, certainly privately, arrived with a list of players and they were all clients of Jorge Mendes. It's kind of extraordinary that even now, after everything is known, that there's certain few agents, they almost have the transfer market and the sport in a vice-like grip. It's kind of incredible.
And he did already bring Matt Doherty from Wolves to Tottenham even before Nuno's arrival a year ago. And of course, what Mendes is doing is not necessarily breaking any of football rules, is it?
It's not breaking them at the moment. It'd be interesting to see if FIFA manage to push through their new agents regulations, specifically in relation to his relationship with Wolverhampton Wanderers, where the owners have a stake in Gestifuti's parent company. But I mean, I've been looking this week at some of the deals that Mendes has done for Wolves. And the four biggest deals involving that club last season, they all involved him, or Gestifuti, and Talents Throne, the agency which is run by the former Gestifuti executive Valdir Cardozo, representing the player, the selling club, and the registering club. They're being paid by all three parties. I know that the two agencies are now separate from each other, but it just shows that the level of influence he has around that club and in English football is big. And now, with Nuno going to Spurs, it's going to get even bigger.
Well, he already had Mourinho there as well. I suppose one of the things we forgot to mention, one Mendes client departed, another one arrives, and it is kind of the Mendes carousel that is going around. I don't know how many tens or hundreds of millions of euros move every summer at the whim of this guy. And I don't know how, what I'd be interested as a fan or someone who follows football is how many of these transfers are done for the right reasons. Does the club need this player, or is it because of the influence of this agent, you're going to do a favour to that guy? It feels like a bubble or something that doesn't make any sense from a kind of sporting perspective. You know, do you know what I mean? Is it some of this feels a bit strange?
And from Mendes' perspective, he's just good at his job. He manages to convince players to sign up to him, clubs to move the players, buy the players. He gets a big cut of it, and more players and managers seem to come to him to want to have him as their agent. Or is a lot of it about perception? So actually, if you have a perception of influence that builds and builds, then actually you get more of this business. We saw it perhaps with Mino Raiola at Manchester United as well, where it seemed that they were so heavily associated with him and his clients. And then you might get clubs fearing upsetting certain agents as well, because you're so reliant on them to eventually get their star players.
Yeah, I think Jorge Mendes is perhaps a case apart. I mean, the relationships he has with certain clubs, Porto, for example. I mean, you know more about this than me or most people, Tariq, but he really does seem to have an incredibly deep web of connections.
Yeah, no, if you speak to the Porto, it's not just Porto, Benfica. You know, he was in at Sport. They in and out, but when he's out, they need him in again. They realise that through some sort of feat of alchemy or whatever else that we don't know behind that magic curtain of his, he's able to extract these prices for players that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to. And you have to ask why. What is going on? And I think this is one for football's authorities. You know, FIFA are trying to change the rules, etc. But maybe something more fundamental needs to happen to the transfer market. Something about, you know, something away from the money aspect, perhaps. You know, how many players you can sign in one window, how players are signed, what contracts, like all of it needs to be re-looked at. Because to me, apart from the very top end, and even there, the business model of a lot of these clubs is based not on any kind of footballing success or playing good football or earning TV rights. Is farming human talent and trading it along on the conveyor belt. Not necessarily trying to compete for anything really beyond selling football players in a marketplace. It just seems that the industry and the game has arrived at this really weird point where this is an end in itself, not winning trophies, not playing football on the field, but trading human beings.
Well, busy time for the agents in the transfer window, but no transfers on this podcast. Same lineup again. And we finally reached episode 25 of Sport and Lot since we started in January. And we've certainly had a lot that's been keeping us busy, and always good to hear your feedback. We're at Sport and Lots on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also email us, sportandlotpod@gmail.com. Of course, the most important thing is to hit subscribe on whichever podcast platform you're listening to us on. And it's always interesting to read some of your feedback too. Some very nice comments that people have left.
Yeah, a quarter of a century. Congratulations, guys. It's been great. Look forward to the next 25. And as you say, yeah, it's always really interesting to see what people have to say. There have been some great ideas people have mentioned on Twitter and other social media. So yeah, keep it coming.
Martyn, Tariq, thanks a lot as ever. Enjoy the sports viewing in the days ahead. And thank you everyone for listening. Goodbye for now.